How can I take better food photos? My photos don't pop off the page. How can I make my photos look more crisp and sharp? Now, if these are questions you've asked yourself or Google before, then I have a few answers for you today. I'm going to be sharing my 5 tips. Okay, let me rephrase that. My 5 easy tips that you can implement today to start seeing some major improvements in your food photography. Hey there, and welcome back to my channel. If you're a food photographer looking to take stunning images and make a successful business from your food photography, then cozy up because you're in the right place. If you've watched any of my videos before, you'll know that I'm not one of those educators that promises overnight results. My own business that makes 6 figures certainly didn't happen overnight, and that's not something I'm going to advocate for you either. But today I want to share with you 5 easy tips or even 5 skills that if you implement in your food photography workflow, they can really help you take your images from a 1 to 100. So let's dive straight in. Okay, the first tip I have for you today is to start shooting in manual mode. Now, one of the easiest things to do is to pick up your camera, put it on auto, and almost immediately take an amazing image. So why am I asking you to shoot in manual mode? The reason is when you shoot on auto, 5 or maybe 4 out of the 10 images you take will be perfect. So really, your camera only has about a 40% chance of getting it right. But we want to get that number up to 100%. We want to get it right every single time you shoot. So if you want to see consistency with your food photography images, if you want to have control over your light, if you want to know exactly what to do in tough lighting situations when the lighting isn't perfect, if you want to have control over your results, your creativity in your images with aspects such as bokeh and movement, you need to be shooting in manual mode. Now look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is hard, I won't lie. If you're not a numbers person like me, it can be daunting and it can feel a bit like climbing Mount Everest. But here are 2 things I can guarantee you. Number 1, if you stick with it for at least 1 week without going back to auto mode, it will become so much easier to the point where eventually you'll know exactly what to do when it comes to your aperture, your shutter speed, and ISO. So much so that you won't even need to think about it. I completely guarantee that you are going to reach that point where you're not actively thinking about what to do with those 3 components. And my second guarantee is your images are going to improve 10-fold, 100-fold. Your food images will be properly exposed. They will be perfectly sharp, and you will have a much better understanding and control over your light. So I really hope that's giving you some motivation to immediately move that button from A on your camera to M for manual and start working on manual mode. The results are definitely worth it. So if you're struggling with lighting and you're struggling getting those crisp, sharp images, this is going to solve that for you. Okay, on to tip number 2, and that's to have a clear grasp on your lighting. So no matter how expensive your camera is, no matter how good your composition skills, your cooking skills, no matter how original and creative your props are, if your lighting isn't up to scratch, then everything in your photo is going to fall flat. And that pun is totally intended here. Now, having a strong grasp on lighting strongly relates to tip number 1, which was shooting in manual mode. But we want to take this 1 step further. You really want to understand the physics behind light. And I promise you, I'm not talking about complicated formulas or concepts here because I'm the least technical person in the world. Trust me when I say my 13-year-old daughter knows more about tech than I do. But what I mean about understanding the physics behind light is actually understanding how light works. The biggest advantage of how light works is that it actually doesn't change. It's completely predictable and it follows a set number of rules. So once you learn those rules, they won't change from day to day, even if your light is changing. If you have a clear understanding of how light behaves, no matter what light situation you're in, no matter the size of the window you're working with, no matter what kind of artificial lighting you're working with or you want to replicate, you will know how to troubleshoot light because you understand how light behaves. So get a clear grip on aspects such as how the size of your light source, the distance between your source and food affects the amount of light, the quality of light, as well as the depth, intensity, and length of your shadows. So many times I hear my students complaining that their images aren't sharp enough or crisp enough or clean enough. And they usually want to blame their camera or lenses. But in reality, 99.9% of the time, it's to do with technique and control of light. So familiarizing yourself with light manipulation will go a long way in your ability to take stunning shots of food. Okay, let's move on to tip number 3. And this is one that you can't really get away from if you're a food photographer or a food blogger, and that's styling your food. As I'm sure you're pretty aware, food styling is actually a whole job in itself. But a lot of the time, depending on where you're at with your food photography journey, especially if you're just starting out, or say your clients don't have the budget to hire a food stylist, you as a photographer are the food stylist. So it's really your job to make your food shine. I think a lot of the time as food photographers, we really focus on, say, things like technique. We focus on our props. We focus on things like lighting, but not so much emphasis is put on food styling. And that's something that can really let our images down. So let me show you an example of exactly what I mean, because sometimes I think seeing is believing. Now, here's an example of a drink shot that was prepared by a barista of a local coffee shop. Now, you're gonna have to ignore the lighting because this is the first shot I took where I was just testing out my light and getting it right. I asked the barista to prepare the drink so I could actually use it as a stand-in whilst I work on my lighting. But you can see the styling of the drink when it's actually prepared for a customer as opposed to the camera. Focus on what the garnish looks like, what the ice is looking like, as well as the color of the drink. Have a look at the glass overall, and then I want you to compare it to my final shot. So once we nail down our lighting and composition for the shot, here is what the final image looked like. And when you put the two images side by side, you definitely have one winner. As you can see, the drink on the right definitely stands out, and so much more than the drink on the left. And this is really all down to the food styling. The stylist used fake ice so that the ice wouldn't melt on set. The glass was prepared in such a way that you could clearly see the condensation. The garnish was prepped in a way that it was visible but not in your face. And then the actual drink was prepared so that you could clearly see the color separation as well as the sparkling and bubbling inside the drink. We wanted to show that this was a sparkling drink, and none of that is visible in the first drink, which was prepared by the barista without a stylist. So even though that original drink tasted fantastic, it's the styling that conveys that story, that creativity behind this drink. As soon as you look at the image, the lighting as well as the styling convey maybe a hot summer day and you're having this cold sparkling drink in front of you. So always pay close attention to how you're styling your food and beverages, especially for camera. Okay, let's move on to tip number 4, and that's to incorporate tethering into your workflow. Now, as a freelance photographer that's making 6 figures consistently shooting food, I'm gonna say it straight. I shoot tethered 100% of the time. Let me put that another way. I never, ever shoot without tethering. And there are so many reasons for me to do that, but the main ones are that it gives me the ability to see what's happening in my image on a much larger screen than my LCD screen of the camera. So what this means is I can actually zoom into my image, I can check to make sure that the image is sharp, it's in focus, I can apply an edit to my image straight away to show the client what the final image could potentially look like with my creativity. I can use overlays to show the client where any text would be, which then means I can actually arrange my composition in a way that will accommodate for this text. Tethering saves me so much time because I'm able to make these small, tiny changes to my set and nail my composition so much faster than I would do if I wasn't shooting tethered. And I definitely take less shots to get to my final image than I would otherwise if I wasn't tethering. Honestly, the reasons for shooting tethered are endless. There really is no reason why a food photographer should not be shooting tethered. So if you really want to take your images from so-so to absolutely professional, and not just your images, but your whole workflow, especially if you're working with clients, then shooting tethered will go such a long way in doing this. And not only does it improve your images, but it also improves your client experience as well. Okay, on to the next tip I have for you to easily level up your food photography, and that's to creatively edit your images. Now, I know there's a huge myth going around in food photography, or probably just photography in general, that I feel like I need to bust today. And that is that your images need to look perfect straight out of camera. And that's just not true. Whilst I completely agree that you should do as much as you can in terms of composition, in terms of lighting on set, a huge part of my overall vision when it comes to the creative direction of my images as well as the final result, is actually through editing. Editing allows you to add your creative stamp and your own vision to your raw images. In fact, I can take one raw image and I can creatively edit it to get vastly different results depending on the mood, the story I want to tell, the vision I have for this image, as well as the emotions I want to evoke. So let me show you an example. So here's a raw image that I took, absolutely no edits done on this yet. And then here are the various edits I did in Lightroom using my presets. And you can see that each edit is completely different from the other, and that is the power of post-production and editing. Depending on what tools and what sliders you're using inside of Lightroom or Capture One, you can achieve so many different creative visions for your raw images. So don't let anyone tell you that everything needs to look perfect straight out of camera, because the reality is a raw image is an unfinished piece of work. It needs to have an edit applied in order for it to come to life, and it's your editing skills and your vision that's going to bring a flat, raw image to life. So get that thought out of your head that everything needs to look perfect and full of contrast in camera, and that you shouldn't be spending any time doing any editing at all. Okay, if you've enjoyed the tips so far, then I'd love for you to download my free 18 lessons guide. It has even more information on how you can level up your food photography as well as start making money from it. As usual, I've linked it in the description box as well as the comment box, so make sure you take advantage and download it. Now, I'd also love for you to comment in the description box and tell me which part of food photography do you need the most help with? Is it lighting? Is it shooting in manual mode? Is it the editing part? Or perhaps it's the styling? Or maybe it's marketing? Tell me what you're struggling with so I can make more in-depth videos on that subject for you. I'll be back next week with a brand new video all about how you can improve your food photography as well as your business. But in the meantime, make sure you check out these two videos I have, which I think you're going to find really helpful if you want to improve your food photography as well as your business. You can also follow me along on Instagram, where I have a ton of behind the scenes as well as reels, as well as tips and tutorials on food photography. See you next week.